Alrighty everyone, it's challenge time. With Scarlet and Violet came the introduction of Paradox forms, so I decided for this month's challenge I wanted to design some of my own Paradox Pokemon. At first I thought Paradox forms were as simple as Pokemon of the past and future, but after watching a ton of theory videos and playing Scarlet for myself, I've come to realize there's a lot of complexity that went into designing Paradox Pokemon. So now that I have my own YouTube channel and a fair amount of Pokemon art under my belt, I'm finally ready to take on coming up with my own Paradox Pokemon. Paradox Pokemon seem to not really be from the past or future, but exist as a contradiction to what we know about Pokemon in general. They are an alternate form of Pokemon, not just what they were or will be, but what they could be. So when I was designing my own past and future Paradox forms, I wanted them to feel like they would fit in with other Paradox Pokemon. I tried to imagine what an ancient or futuristic version could be without restricting myself to what they would more obviously be. But there will be similar design elements to the ones we see in Scarlet and Violet's Paradox forms. I had a long list of options to consider for Paradox Pokemon, but in the end I chose ones that I had a solid concept in mind, a confidence in my ability to execute them, and mildly personal preference. I'm not perfect. I too have favorites or even Pokemon designs I'd like to see expanded on. I figured I'd start where most things do, in the past. The central theme for Paradox forms in Pokemon Scarlet is that they are the concept of ancient primal Pokemon. They have fangs and tails among other feral features. They keep their primary types while gaining a new secondary typing. When it came to designing past Paradox Pokemon, I wanted to keep these elements in mind, but also maintain their connection to the Pokemon that they were created from. All of the past Paradoxes will have elements and inspirations that are more identified as primal. So let's get to it. The first past Paradox form I came up with is Glittering Grin. I have always thought Sableye was a perfect Pokemon design. The balance of cute and mischievous is unbeatable. I'm a big fan of fantasy worlds, especially ones with goblins and gremlins, and Sableye is an example of that done right. Since goblins are common in fairy tales, I gave Sableye the much-needed fairy typing. So when I was looking down the list of 1,025 Pokemon, it's still hard to believe there's that many now, and came across Sableye, I was inspired. I knew I wanted to go feral since the past Paradox forms in Scarlet all have that vibe to them. The name was easy enough and helped inspire the diamond teeth. To make Glittering Grin appear more wild, I gave it this sharp, messy fur all over its body. I felt like this gave it the appearance that Glittering Grin rarely groom and spend most of their time in the deepest caves far from the light of day. As I previously mentioned, past Paradox Pokemon that don't have a tail tend to get one or something like it, so I gave Glittering Grin a longer, pointy tail. Alright, let's talk about the biggest change I made here, the eyes. I wanted my design to have that paradoxical aspect to it, and I've always wondered how cool it would be if a Pokemon had heterochromia. Usually the shinies are very similar to their regular versions, but they can have minor differences, so the heterochromia stays and the belly jewel is a different color. Otherwise, it's still a classic gold shiny. Moving on to the next past Paradox. This is Terrible Trio. When I was thinking about past Paradox forms, I just sort of had the inspiration that Dodrio plus Terrorbird was literally a perfect concept for this video. And once I had the idea, I had to see it realized. In the anime and Dex entries, it's well known that Dodrio's 3 heads are always competing for dominance and tend to have a bad temper as well. So combining Dodrio with Terrorbird's was surprisingly easy for me. I gave the fluff of Dodrio an unruliness and made the beaks larger and serrated to help tie in the Terrorbird aspects. Instead of 2 feathers, Terrible Trio have 3, one that is longer than the other 2. They will compare the lengths of these feathers as a way to assert dominance. The one with the longest feather, no matter how small the difference, becomes the leading head. When the feathers are similar in length, this leads to squabbling among the heads. Because of all the hints to it being aggressive, not only to others but itself, I thought Fighting type would fit really well into this design. For the legs, I just made them a little bigger and more powerful, and made the claws bigger too. The tail I extended and pointed the feathers and gave a whole new coloration and pattern. Since Terrible Trio is Fighting type and red and blue are common secondary colors for Fighting types, I added them into the color palette. For the shiny, I'll be honest, Dodrio is probably one of the worst cases of green shiny I've seen, so I changed it up a bit. Green and orange worked really well for the feathers and let Terrible Trio keep a touch of Dodrio's original green shiny. I think Terrible Trio is probably one of the cooler concepts I've come up with since starting this channel, and I'm pretty happy with the results. The next Paradox I decided to take on I had to put a lot of effort into, so I hope you guys like what I did. This is Striking Beauty. So I know I personally think Melodic is absolutely stunning as far as Pokemon designs go, and I'm apt to believe the Pokemon Company does too, considering how you get Melodic in the Hoenn and Sinnoh regions. Some might even say its beauty is striking, So with that in mind, and strikes being a term used in many styles of fighting, I thought, wouldn't it be super paradoxical if a beautiful Pokemon like Melodic was once a powerful fighting type? Melodic is already color-coded in a way that could easily be fighting type, so I didn't change much there, just made the colors a little more saturated. I knew I had to change Melodic's head shape to be more aggressive without losing the appearance of Melodic, so I extended the horn and face, ending it in more of a point. I also added a second smaller horn behind the original one to help add that primal feel. For the tail, since Melodic already had such a prominent one, I extended it and added an extra fin segment so Striking Beauty can move more rapidly through water. The scales of Melodic's tail I extended up the back to help further the past vibe. I also added extra ribbon thingies. I'm not sure what they are, but now there's 4 of them. And finally, I made the body spiky. I felt like that really tied in the savage nature of Striking Beauty and made it fit perfectly with other Paradox Pokemon. Melodic already has an amazing shiny, so I just took Melodic's shiny palette and translated it over for Striking Beauty. I was super nervous trying to design a past Paradox form of Melodic, but I think it turned out pretty cool. In Scarlet and Violet, Volcarona and Dawnfam both have past and future Paradox forms. So the final past Paradox I designed today will also have a future Paradox form. Introducing Nashing Maw. Clawitzer may not have been the first Pokemon I thought of when I was thinking about past Paradox Pokemon, but when I came across it on my trip down the long list of Pokemon, again I was inspired. Clawitzer's claw already looks a lot like a dragon's head, so I thought here's a great chance to add dragon type to a non-dragon type Pokemon. Dragons are creatures of old myths and legends, so I had to have at least one Paradox that gained the dragon type. I knew I wanted the claw to become a dragon's skull, and when I was searching for dragon skulls for inspiration in Pokemon, I took a long look at Regidrago and I knew what I had to do. Regidrago's dex entry states that Regigigas created it from the skull of an ancient dragon Pokemon and is yet to be identified. I figured what would work better than an ancient unidentified dragon skull for Nashing Maw's design. For the body, I made the carapace more aggressive by adding more and extending the existing spines. I again thought about how past Paradox Pokemon typically have something done with the tail, and since Nashing Maw is a dragon type, I decided to go with a longer tail that resembles a cross between a dragon and Shrimp's tail. For the colors, I kept pretty much the same colors as Clawitzer's, since Clawitzer already had a great color palette and typically past Paradox forms don't venture too far from their original colors. I feel like Clawitzer's claw in the original design already had a pretty powerful presence, so by making it into a dragon skull, it's really just helping further that aspect. And that's the final past Paradox Pokemon I did for this challenge. Now let's take a step out of the past and into the future. Violet's Paradox Pokemon are all a robotic version of known Pokemon. The features are typically smoother and are made up of segmented metal parts. They even tend to pick up an interesting design in the gray regions, probably hinting at whatever material they are made of. So in designing future Paradox Pokemon, I did my best to make them look like robotic versions of themselves while being instantly identifiable as what Pokemon they were inspired by. In some ways, this was both easier and harder than designing past Paradoxes. One of the hardest things I was constantly reminding myself was to imagine how different parts would move and connect to one another. Without a lot of knowledge in robotics, I found it to be quite the difficult task. I hope I was able to capture the same futuristic vibe as the ones in Violet with these designs, but I'll leave that up for you to decide. Introducing Iron Blaster. Like I said, a few Pokemon got past and future Paradox forms in Scarlet and Violet, and I really wanted to mirror that with my own designs. When I decided to do Clawitzer, part of my decision was because I had a strong concept for both the past and future forms. I knew a ray gun in place of Clawitzer's claw would work so well and look really cool too. So with that concept in mind, I started designing Iron Blaster. I made Clawitzer's claw a ray gun, and the whiskers are now wires plugging into Iron Blaster's body. Since Clawitzer is based on the pistol shrimp, I thought that the fire typing would be a good secondary type. I smoothed the shell to look more like plates of metal and removed the little mouth tendril thingies entirely so it would feel properly robotic. All of the future Paradox Pokemon have pixelated eyes, so I included that in my design, keeping them yellow same as Clawitzer's. The futuristic patterned gray material is present as well on the Raygun claw. I could see Iron Blaster having been created as a futuristic weapon, charging up the raygun of its claw before delivering a powerful blast. Just like the future Paradox Pokemon of Pokemon Violet, I kept the color palette more or less the same. I did add in a pop of red because it worked well with the design, and Clawitzer's shiny is red, so I felt safe to add it in. All of the future Paradox shinies are a white or silver color, so I went with the silver option. I'm actually really glad I chose Clawitzer for this challenge because I was able to do 2 unique designs for the same Pokemon. Now let's move on to the next future Paradox. This is Iron Spring. I personally love Spoink, and when thinking of future Paradox Pokemon, I really wanted to turn Spoink into a spring-loaded rechargeable battery. Since Spoink's dex entry tells us that it constantly bounces to stay alive, I knew it would be the perfect concept for a robot that bounces around on a spring to recharge a battery. Because of its spring-powered design, Iron Spring would have the potential to never run out of charge. So that being said, Iron Spring is now electric type. Turning Spoink into a robot was one of the easier things I've done so far. The body shape was already a smooth oval shape, so I just added plating lines and made the ears look like moving parts. For the spring, I felt this was a good way to incorporate the glowy liquid parts as well as the pearl. This way it feels connected and fluid. I added the gray pattern material to Iron Spring's stomach to help it fit in with Violet's Paradox Pokemon design. I gave Iron Spring pixelated eyes as well, since it's a common design aspect among future Paradox Pokemon. I really love Spoink. I mean, just look at that adorable face! I would absolutely have an Iron Spring on my Violet team if I could, and since the Paradox Pokemon don't evolve, no Grumpig. Sorry, not sorry. Alright, the next Pokemon I designed is one I'm certain everyone is familiar with by now. This is Iron Speaker. If there's any Pokemon I would expect to find a version of in the distant future and also be firmly in the mind of anyone that could imagine a futuristic Pokemon, it'd have to be Zubat. I don't know about you guys, but when I was growing up, I'm pretty sure I was traumatized from the amount of Zubats in the early gen caves. I remember stocking up on repels and using them the second I ran out because I was so tired of all the dang Zubats. For the secondary typing, I decided that Steel would be a good fit. Since they had a bad tendency to supersonic all my Pokemon, I figured why not turn it into a speaker that can further amplify its confusing sonic attacks. As with Iron Hands, I detached the wings and made them float near the main body. The ears and mouth are speakers for proper amplification. I turned Zubat's tail into audio jacks, implying it could be plugged into sound systems. Maybe the people of the future would use Iron Speaker at concerts or public speeches. I incorporated the gray material into the middle of the body since that's what looked best. The color palette is a less vibrant version of Zubat's, and the shiny is the same as other future Paradoxes. Even though my personal experiences may have left me not the biggest fan of Zubat, I do think it's a good Pokemon, and that giving it a future Paradox form, something like this, would be pretty cool and maybe even bring me back around. The final Paradox Pokemon I did for today's challenge is not only a fan favorite, but possibly my favorite Paradox design I made. I have once again returned to Gen 1. I know, I seem to want to pay homage to the gen that started it all, so bear with me till I get it out of my system, okay? Introducing Iron Screen. Snorlax is loved among the Pokemon community, myself included. Since parents often complain about TV making kids lazy and inattentive, and Snorlax is known for napping in inconvenient places at inopportune times, it would be a great concept for a future Paradox Pokemon. Because of the hypnotic quality of television, I made Iron Screen Psychic type. Snorlax's body shape was already perfect to turn into a large TV screen, and for that I was inspired by old box TVs. The face is locked in a permanent yawning expression because of the sleepy laziness of Snorlax. The body is a slightly altered version of Snorlax's blue, and I made the foot pads and hands the glowy liquid parts. Since Iron Screen's eyes are closed, no pixelation needed in this design. I could imagine people of the future having Iron Screen as the family entertainment system, and maybe it could even function in symbiosis with Iron Speaker for a home theater experience. You might have noticed the gray pattern isn't present in Iron Screen, but that's because it's on the back. Due to Iron Screen having a TV on its torso, there wasn't much room to include the pattern on the front, so I just figured it would work better on the back. Unfortunately, that also means out of view, so I guess that's the trade-off. I'm super happy with this design in particular. It's a simple concept, but I feel like it fits so well. And that's all my Paradox Pokemon. I hope you guys liked my Paradox Pokemon ideas, and I'd love to know what Pokemon you wish it got in Paradox form, so let me know in the comments below. I have a lot of fun making these videos, so if you like what you see, hit that like button to let me know, and if you want to see more of my awesome fakemon content, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. I'm already working on my next video, and I can't wait to share more of my fakemon with you guys. So until next time!